Thanks for joining us today. I have my friend David Higginbotham all the way from Waco, Texas with us again today.
Thank you, Chris. It's my pleasure to be a part. I appreciate you asking me. Thank you so much.
Hey, by the way, happy birthday. Today's birthday week. In my household, I like to call it birthday month. So happy birthday month, David.
Yeah, my birth, what is today? Is this Thursday?
The 25th.
Yes, yeah. Well, the 23rd, which was Tuesday, I celebrated my birthday, and I am 69 years old, which means I have entered my 70th year. So that's kind of a big deal. I'll be on my next birthday, and I've told my wife and my kids, next year I'm expecting a big party.
Fair enough. They have almost a whole year to plan
Got a
it.
year. I was 70 years old. So yeah, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate this.
You're welcome. Well, last time we focused on the spouse dynamics, us guys having a PhD in our wife.
Yes.
Meaning that we study them, we're a student of, looking to become more effective and more sharp and loving our wife well, and really just being intentional in that relationship. And today, you and I have talked about we're going to switch gears, even though there's more to unpack and share. Maybe we'll do that in the future, David. Circle back to the PhD and wife, and yet
there's always
we're going to
more.
focus on if we have children.
Yes.
Right. So the household dynamics and strengthening and building relationships with the children we've been entrusted with. No pressure, right?
Yeah, none.
And
Not at all.
so David, what is it you would like to share when it comes to being intentional with our children?
That's a great question, Chris. I want to start with making just several fundamental statements. I begin with this one. It's every parent's responsibility to be focused and involved on developing the foundation that their child will eventually use to build their own lives. Every parent has the responsibility. It's not a dad thing. It's not a mom thing. It is a parent thing. Ideally, there will be a focused and committed and involved dad and a focused and committed and involved mom. That's the best case scenario. We know, however, that doesn't happen a lot of the time. But whether there's a single parent or there is a two-parent home, the parents are responsible. And by the way, if there happens to be a separation or a divorce, the non-custodial parent is still just as responsible to help develop the foundation that the child is going to use when they ultimately begin to build their own lives. And so that's what I want to talk about. I want to focus on 5 key things. There are 5 key elements to that foundation that every parent is responsible to be developing. Now, let me put a pause and a parenthesis here. There has never been a perfect parent. There just hasn't been. And there's never been a perfect child. Someone would say, with the exception of Jesus Christ. But no, when Jesus was 3 years old, he knew what a 3-year-old knows, and that's it. Okay, so no child has ever had perfect parents, and no parents ever had perfect children. So the things I'm going to share this morning are within that context. I was not a perfect parent. I'm not a perfect parent now. My children were not perfect parents. But there are some fundamental things that if we come to understand them and embrace them, or let me rephrase that, to the degree that we come to understand and embrace them, it's going to have a positive and substantive impact on the child's life. And so that's the stuff I want to talk about this morning, covering 5 of those key elements that's involved in the process. Does that make sense?
It does.
Let me begin with a quick overview of what I'm talking about in terms of developing a foundation for your child's life. I want to talk initially today. I'm going to be talking about that birth to 3-year-old, but there's also 3 to 5-year-olds, 6 to 9-year-old, 10 to 12, 13 to 15. My point is, you're going to be dealing with a child that's 10 years old differently than you deal with a child that's 4. And the 10-year-old has different needs than the 4-year-old does. But however, that is true at every stage of a child's developing life. They really do need these 5 key elements actively being poured into them. That's not a good phrase, but it's the only one I can think of. Parents need to be engaging with their children in these 5 areas and looking to sow into them stability and seeds that are going to ultimately produce the kind of fruit we want to have. We want to have children who grow into young adults, who grow into adults, and it gives us the sense my kid has an opportunity to really thrive in life. Chris, you and I both know this. I've heard you use the phrase before, and I've used it. Success doesn't happen accidentally. It just simply doesn't. Success doesn't happen accidentally. And like you've said before, success leaves clues. If you find someone who's been successful in a particular arena of life, real estate or business or sales or physics, education, athletics, and you trace back from where they are in this successful place, you'll see things along the way that will say, hey, this guy's going that direction. Oh, now he's going that direction. He's better. Success leaves clues. And one of the clues that I've seen over the years in my own life and in the lives of other people who have raised children who have learned to flourish in life is consistent, active engagement from the parent to the child. Consistent, active engagement that is rooted in love, and committed to working through whatever process it takes to help the child get to the next level. Nobody likes potty training. But you know what? Imagine what would happen in your child's life if you didn't manage to work through potty training.
It would be a mess.
Yeah, it would be a mess. So
right.
There are those times in our children's lives when we have, you know what, we just have to put our own stuff aside and focus on the child. So from the early stages of a child's life, there are 5 of these key elements. And by the way, what I'm sharing with you it's just stuff I've learned through life, sometimes from older parents, sometimes from books and things here along the way, but primarily from the experience and the trial and error of parenthood. Listen, you can't be a parent more than about 30 minutes without trial and error. Right. You know, because, Chris, we just don't know what we don't know.
It's true.
And so, starting in that birth to 3-year-old area, I want to talk about these 5 things. First of all, the number one thing, security. And I'm thinking about, when I'm talking about a foundation, I'm not talking about the slab type of foundation that happens in so many homes today. You know, you and I are both involved in real estate, and there's a slab foundation, it's poured concrete, and everything is built on top of that. The other type of foundation, which was most common in years gone by, but still is happening today, we in the real estate industry call it pier and beam. There's a stem wall built around the outside, and then covering the area in the middle, there are piers that are concrete and steel that are put in the ground, and the post comes up and it holds the foundation of the house, the pier and beam. That's an image that's more conducive to the kind of foundation I'm talking about, because you build a section of a house with a pier and beam. Later you're going to add a family room, you do the same thing. You can add an extra bedroom, you can add to the house with a pier and beam. That's the kind of foundation I want to focus on. Kids born, comes into the household, doesn't know a thing.
Mm-hmm.
The birth to 3-year-old is the most incredible life-expanding experience that child's ever going to have in their entire life. From an infant, from a newborn to 3 years old, the growth The development is absolutely amazing when you look at the details. So it's a key time to begin developing these 5 things. First of all, security. A child who grows up without a well-established sense of security in their lives is going to face life from a significant disadvantage. Here's what security communicates to the child. Number 1, I am safe. Number 2, I am not alone. When something is wrong and I cry, someone comes to help me. And so someone has my back. Now, a 2-year-old child's not going to think in those kinds of terms, but they know whether they feel that way or not. I mean, a 2-year-old that doesn't feel safe, it's got some real challenges going on. I am safe. I am not alone. Someone has my back. I am secure. I can sit in the middle of my living room floor and play with some toys and not have to be held in someone's lap. I look up and I see mommy. Oh, I hear the noise, I look up, and there's my brother, or there's daddy, or my sister, or there's Pluto the dog. Have you ever seen these pictures of a little baby, little kid taking a nap with their heads laying up right next to a pit bull, a German Shepherd? It's like, whoa,
Right.
whoa. Well, that baby's laying up there with that dog because they feel safe. They feel safe. That's a kid who has the development of the foundation of security being built into their lives. If you don't have it, you don't have it. And there are ways to begin. You can always start later. You can build, but security is really important. The second thing is,
Hey, David, before we move to number 2.
Sorry, Chris. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, it's all right. So earlier this week, I saw a YouTube video. It was a short, maybe reel, and it had I would say the child had to be about 6, 8 months years old in like this booster seat sitting at a kitchen table. And on the kitchen table were some toys that the baby was playing with. And the video was titled something like how arguing parents impact your kids. And it was a stage scene where the couple in the background started arguing and just had a real tense, angry tone towards each other, and you see the little child's face just completely change. It stopped playing with the toys and just sat there and looked extremely scared. So when you talk about security, I'm just reminded of what I saw about how the child completely changed when tension was in the atmosphere of the home.
The child can't understand the words being used, but the child knows there's anger, there's yelling, there's back and forth, and the child knows, I don't feel safe. Mm-hmm. See, they don't know the words, but you know what? They know the spirit of what's happening there. They know, they have that sense, I'm not safe. We're not, something is wrong. And growing up in that, imagine the child who grows up in a secure environment, and then the child who grows up in an insecure environment. When you see them 20 years down the road, probably their lives are going to look and feel very different. So security is number 1 from my perspective. The second thing is identity. Identity answers the question, Chris, who am I? Who am I? And there's a personal identity. Our granddaughter Colette celebrated her first birthday just a few weeks ago. Precious little one. And when you call Colette, she looks. And she's been doing that for a number of months. When she was 2 months old, 3 months old, you across the room, you said, Colette. She didn't know what that meant. But she has come to understand that she is Colette. That's her name. And she has come to understand because there's a personal ID, there's a personal identity that's a part of this component. The second is the family component. She's got 3 older brothers. Lord help her. She's got she's got 3 older brothers that are full of superhero stuff and building Legos and action, and I mean it's just a household full of boys with this little girl coming along. At some point, not too distant future, she'll be ruling the roost. I can tell you that.
Right.
But that family idea, that's my brother. He belongs here. I belong here. We belong here. There's security feeds into that answering of the question, who am I? Who am I? Well, another part of identity is preferences. One of the things that just surprised me as a kid, with our child, we were young marrieds and had Taylor, and he was sitting up starting to work on some solid foods and some stuff, and I thought, this is going to be great. Got some mashed potatoes here, put some mashed potatoes in his mouth, and he went like this, and just sort of spit it out. And his mother, well, she tasted the potatoes. Well, no, it tastes fine. He didn't like it. The texture wasn't quite right. Never did for years. Now, he would eat French fries, but he didn't like mashed potatoes. You know why? Because of his identity. He didn't like it. That's his preference. My brother and I grew up together in Central Florida many, many years ago. And one of the things that we would do in the summertime is we'd get a watermelon. Chill it in the ice chest all day long, and in the evening go split that thing and cut it up and have watermelon. My brother did not want watermelon. He didn't like watermelon. So my mom would get a cantaloupe because he did like cantaloupe, which was the strangest thing to me. I kept thinking, are you my brother? Well, yeah, he is my brother, but he's got preferences. I've got preferences. Preferences are a part of identity. And in a home where preferences are recognized and honored, it's okay not to like mashed potatoes. Well, you have to like mashed potatoes because, well, no, it's okay not to. Security is about feeling safe. I'm not alone. Someone has my back. Identity is about, I'm Bobby, and that's Billy, and that's Bozo, my brothers. And I don't like mashed potatoes. You see, who am I begins to be answered in a child's life even before they can ask the question. The kid's not asking, who am I? They're just learning who they are. And providing that kind of identity foundation so that the kid has a place to be who they are. You don't have to be like your brother. You don't have to be like your sister. You don't know who are you. Be who you are. See, that provides the kind of foundational opportunity so that as a kid grows into their latter, those primary years, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, preteen years, into their early high school years, a kid who has clarity about who they are is going to be less susceptible to trying to pretend they're somebody else. It's an important thing.
So earlier under security, you mentioned 0 to 3 years old. Have we moved beyond that age category now?
This is still in the 0 to 3 years. This is up to that place where a kid is able to. A 3-year-old is still coming out of that toddler stage. When they're coming.
Well, this is so interesting, David, because my son Matthew, actually his birthday's tomorrow. He turns 13 years old.
All right, yeah.
Him and I were watching a TV show. Oh, the show Alone, where they go out and live in the wilderness, and then there's a cash prize, and the best person wins or whatever, whoever survives the longest.
Right.
And they put a camera up and record, and they're left by themselves.
Yes.
A father, my son and I were watching the show, and the scene was a father recording a happy birthday message to his son who just turned 2 years old. And I made the comment to my son that what's he? I'm surprised that he's so emotional about this. Like his son's not even going to remember dad being gone. He's only 2 years old. And so the reason I share that story, David, is because I think my pushback to this, or not even really pushback, just kind of my understanding, I would say, man, I would almost discount the significance of that 0 to 3 year
Yes.
3 year old mark, given the fact I'm like, how much do I remember from 0 to 3? Nothing. So it's not really significant. And
That's a
yet,
great
what
point.
I hear you saying,
Hmm.
that it's incredibly significant.
It is, and your perspective that you were saying, well, no, kid's not even going to know.
Right.
Well, there's a difference between what I would call active memory, okay, and the developmental memory that happens prior to that. You see, the kid in the high chair, when mom and dad started screaming at one another, is not going to have a cognitive active memory of that event happening when they were 9 months old. But if that is something that's consistently happening in that child's home, that will become a baseline for what is normal. And so their
Even
understanding,
at the 0 to 3 age range?
absolutely,
Wow.
because,
That's interesting.
because it has, see, we have missed, I think, the dynamic of emotional impact in our lives. Trauma happens in times when we don't even expect it. And the sudden absence of a father in the household for a 3-year-old child can be devastating. Even though by the time they're 8 or 10, they won't remember that actually taking place, the impact of it in their soul, okay, in their emotions, in that spiritual, emotional, dynamic part of their being. We are not simply cells that function in the material world. There's another dynamic that is true of all human beings. Some of us experience it more than others. That's simply because they haven't tapped into it and haven't gotten comfortable with that at the same level. But the reality is we are human beings, and we are distinct from the animals in that regard. So when a child is 3 years old and they suffer some trauma that's happening, like again and again and again being scared, that lays a baseline in their life for what they're going to understand as normal. That child will eventually become like the deer that's munching on the grass out by the runway where the airplane comes in and lands. The airline's coming in and landing. I flew in and out of Kansas City for years, and every time you would come in and land, there would be deer out there by the jet runway, and they're out there munching on the grass, and the jets coming in going. Well, they've gotten used to it, so their baseline, and that happens with animals. It happens with humans as well. And I understand the thinking. Well, I'm going to start messing around with my kid when they're old enough to remember it. What
Mm-hmm.
that do, and I get that, but what it does is it leaves a big gap, because because what happens is whenever my kid moves into that 3 to 5 range, I'm still going to be working on security and identity. And we're going to move to the next one here in just a minute. When they're 10 years old, I'm still working on security and identity. And if I've been working on my child from the very early stages of their life, if I've been putting 7, 8, 10 years of nurturing this kid's life, and that's the next one, nurture, which has to do with emotional needs, rather than starting to try to deal with those things when they're 10 years old, I'm going to be way, way ahead of the curve when I started at 6 months and 3 months, and loving and hugging, lots of touch, lots of whispering in the ears and the rocking, and helping my child develop a deep connection to me personally opens the doors and builds bridges across which communication can occur down the road. And that's a really important thing to know.
When it comes to trauma, David, what would be some examples of what a child experiencing trauma could look like?
Well, we've used this illustration so far. I've got some experiences in my extended family, and you do too, of adults acting like idiots. and anger and rage and those kinds of things being regularly expressed in the context of the household establishes a baseline for the child of what's normal. And the adrenaline rushes up with them, and they're quick to respond, and so they begin to act out that. Children don't watch the way their parents act and then say, I don't think I'm going to do that. 4-year-old is going to see how mom and dad react, and how his brothers or her sisters react, and they just simply copy what's going on in front of them. Once again, it establishes a baseline. And if a child is being raised in an environment where they don't feel secure, they regularly don't feel secure, they're not going to sleep well, the whole potty training thing could very much be prolonged or create other kinds of challenges. They lose that sense or never develop that sense of, I'm Bobby and that's Billy and I don't like mashed potatoes, because liking mashed potatoes may be an important thing to deal with. You need to eat this food kind of thing. It's an unhealthy environment. And imagine imagine the pier and beam house. And over in the child's bedroom, there needs to be 4 supports there to support the weight, but there's only 1. That's not going to be a very stable part of the house. It's just not going to be. And so we have to understand as parents that it's my responsibility to be actively engaged in developing a foundation for my child's life. And that doesn't start when they are at a convenient age for me. It starts when they are at an inconvenient age for me, because the kid can't change their own diaper. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Let's move over. Go ahead. You got another comment.
I think I wanted you to unpack and give some examples of what trauma could look like, because I think sometimes, for me, I think about trauma and I just imagine someone else's scene that looks worse than my baseline. Oh. And one of the things in a conversation, a month or 2 ago, you and we were talking about the word trauma came up. I therefore brought up the word victim, and I have some strong emotions, thoughts, and feelings. Not being a victim was the context of our conversation. And you helped me understand and unpack and really embrace, for the first time ever in my life, a different perspective about being what I remember being a child, to where being in an environment I had no other option to be in. It's what I was brought into and where I was at as a child, because sometimes we experience things that we have no skin in the game. It's not as a result of the choices that we make. It's the household we're born into. Absolutely. Yeah, good call on a lot of times. I think that's the reality, David.
Yeah, I think so.
And for me, it was helpful when you helped me understand that, Chris, this is the situation. You had no control, and yet that you were a victim then. However, that doesn't mean that you choose to be a victim moving forward.
Yes.
Point is that you helped me acknowledge something I've never thought about, that I feel like it's starting to set me free and help me understand things in a different way, to be able to overcome some things and continue to receive some healing, to insert some forgiveness, and to move forward in my life, really.
That's good. All of us have stuff that happens to us in our lives. Some of the stuff that happens to us in our lives, we sort of brought on ourselves, right, because we did dumb stuff, But a birth to 3-year-old, 3 to 6-year-old, that's not in that category. They're they make silly mistakes, but it's not the same thing. I mean, where violence is involved, where high emotional stress is involved, where anger and yelling and accusations, and even a child who doesn't understand the words has a sense that there's a battle going on here and I don't feel safe. that is on the parents. And you know what? Those parents often brought that from their childhood. There's no perfect world, and there are no perfect parents.
Right.
We are all pretty much just sort of making it the best we can most of the time. None of us got really any kind of significant training about what's actually involved in being a parent. We watched Ozzie and Harriet, and we watched Leave It to Beaver, and we've watched Hallmark movies, and we sort of have this distorted idea of what life, Little House on the Prairie, Andy Griffith. Oh, I wish life were like that. I wish life were like that again. Well, the truth is, life never was like that. That's all television, and it's all fiction. Real life happens where people are broken and hurt, and they often pass that on. And one of the things that I want us to say in this opportunity is to say to parents, time out. You have to find a way to put your stuff aside and focus on developing the kind of foundation that's going to help your child build a life in the future where they have an opportunity to thrive. It's not simple. It's not easy. It takes lots of work and lots of sacrifice, but that's what love's all about. And so learning how to make my child feel secure in a healthy way, learning how to help my child discover an identity that clicks with them in a healthy way, leads us into the next three, and they sort of connect together. And number three is nurture. A child where nurturing is a fundamental part of their life, and nurturing focuses on emotional needs. When a kid falls down and skins their knee and they're crying, their primary need is not necessarily the knee or the scrape on the knee. Their primary need is for somebody to hold them and to take them and say, it's okay, let me see what here. Someone to come in, someone to step into that moment and be in charge. Because the kid's not feeling very secure right now. I don't feel safe. Why? Because I'm just hurt. Well, why? I fell down. Okay, it's okay. Nurturing the emotional needs sets up the opportunity to care for the physical needs, and care is number 4. Security, identity, nurture, care. Caring for the physical needs of the child, which means finding a way and learning how, one of the things, to provide some basic nutrition for the kid. He doesn't eat chips and yo-yos all day long, or not. Yo-yos are not even a thing anymore. Doritos and Oreos. That's caring for the needs of a child is the most important thing that a parent could do. Caring for the emotional needs, for the physical needs. It's my responsibility to care for this child. Because here's why. Me caring for this child, doing the best I can, giving it the best I've got, is a huge part of developing a foundation for that child's life. Because if my child feels safe, yes. If they feel like they're not alone, if they feel like somebody's got their back, someone's watching out for their emotional needs, someone's watching out for their physical needs, that sets up number 5, which is bonding. You see, children bond with their parents because it's the next step. A healthy bond. I mean, you're just a little kid, you're just a baby, but you feel safe, you're not alone. Someone's got your back, they're taking care of you. They give you space not to like watermelon. Your name, and they don't let your brothers beat up on you too much. And your emotional needs are their priority. Your physical needs are their priority. You have a place to belong.
So, David, you brought up Leave It to Beaver. And I remember mom would watch that a little bit growing up, as well as MTV. And yet, with Leave It to Beaver, the scene oftentimes was what little bit I remember. The dad would be coming home from work. The mom would be there at the sun. They would sit down at the kitchen table and have dinner. And the
Yes,
reason I
yes.
bring that up is because I think sometimes in listening to stories, in particular of older guys, my dad, for example, he shared the story where he felt like his mom was very nurturing, very loving and caring
Mm,
on the emotional side to him, and yet part of his brokenness is he felt very abandoned, neglected, and he would describe his father, my grandpa, as harsh. And
mm.
so is there any input that anything that you would want to share? Because I think sometimes there could be a thinking that says, well, the dad just tells it as it is and is make sure that he goes to work to keep the kid alive. That's the primary function of the father, to be the provider, and the mom is the nurturing one. Where somehow we divide these and each people live in their box. Is there anything that you would want to expand on or truth you'd want to bring when it comes to any of those statements or thoughts?
Let me offer you a perspective that you're probably not going to hear other places because it's not the kind of thing that most people want to say. It doesn't make you popular and you'll get fewer Christmas cards. That approach to fatherhood was in full bore by the end of, well, frankly, by the end of World War II, but even before that. My father was born in the late 20s, 1929. His father was born in the early 1800s. Hard scrabble life, difficult. My grandfather was a coal miner, and my father was born into a family. He was the second child, but the oldest boy. I was having a conversation with him many years later when I was an adult and had a child. And I asked him about the relationship he had with his dad because I'm engaging with this thing now. I'm realizing I got some major gaps and I need some help. And we mentioned this the last time we talked. I think I might have mentioned this. And my father said to me, I really didn't have much of a relationship with my father. What? What do you mean? I don't ever remember sitting in my father's lap. My father never read any stories to me. And his eyes teared up and he said, I don't ever remember my father telling me that he loved me. He said, so I tried to do a better job with you. And he had. The kind of stoic, dad goes to work, mom stays home, takes care of the kids, dad's the provider, don't bother me, I'm going to read my newspaper, kind of approach to parenting led to fathers who basically embraced the same thing at some level because they just didn't know what to do. And that type of parenting across the country in the 40s and 50s raised up a generation of people who marched in the streets and burned down buildings because they didn't like something that was going on in the world around them, and led into a widespread drug abuse. My generation, thankfully I was about 3 or 4 years too young to actively be a part of it, but I saw it happen. The 60s and 70s were the disruption and the upheaval that happened in the 60s and 70s was done by kids who were raised by fathers with that kind of thinking. I don't think it's the only contributor to it, but it certainly can't be left out. I think that kind of thinking, let the women raise the kids, men go out and kill the deer and bring it back and butcher it, and let the women take care of the children. The man go out and be the hunter. Let the woman be the gatherer. Bring home the paycheck. Don't bother me with the kids. Kind of thinking that kind of thinking made a significant contribution to the destruction of millions of lives of young people that are no longer young people, that are people that are my age and older. So I'm not a big fan of that kind of thinking. And just because you don't know what to do doesn't mean you can't learn. I mean, I'm a grandfather now. My son and his wife are raising 4 grandchildren. Our daughter and her husband will have children at some point in the future, we think. And they are responsible. They are responsible to engage with their children in such a diligent, focused way so as to develop a foundation upon which their children are going to be able to build lives where they can flourish. Nobody else is going to do it. The school system isn't going to do it. The church, for God's sake, isn't going to do it. Because it's run by people who have the same mindset. You see, we have to think differently. We have to recognize that the next generation that's coming up now is 2 generations behind me. So what kind of job did I do? What kind of job did I do raising my kids? Well, I tell you, it's going to show up. Because success leaves clues. And you know what else leaves clues? Failure, my friend. Well, we're talking about something that we can't afford to fail. We can't afford to fail in raising up our children and our grandchildren, in learning, frankly, in equipping dads to learn how to do this. Well, I don't even know where to begin. I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation with guys. Have a conversation going on with a guy right now. You know, he comes from a family with severe gaps in his foundation. And frankly, knowing what I know about him and about his foundation and his life, I'm amazed that he is as stable as he is. I'm going, whoa, and you're just an example of God's grace here. But he needs some help, Chris. He needs some help, and you can't go to a Chiefs game or a football game or a baseball game and throw a rock and not hit a guy who needs help. Man, it is pervasive. Our culture is decaying from within because there's been numerous generations, and I'm too passionate about this. I need to back off a little bit. There's numerous generations of adults now who were raised by adults who didn't know how to raise adults. And now that adult generation doesn't know how to raise adults. And so what's happening is the cultural decline that we are experiencing has got nothing to do with Democrats. It's got nothing to do with Republicans. No, they contribute their own stuff. Because primarily the leadership of those groups are raised by men who didn't know how to raise adults. My heart breaks. I had a conversation this morning on the phone on the way back from Dallas. And this guy is this close to having his entire world upside down. Now, you know what? We all grow up. We make our own choices. And he's made some choices that have put him in this position. But the thing that I see is that the house that he has built for himself is like this. Because over the years, the foundation that he had just sort of begins to cave in on itself. This is crucial. And it's probably something, excuse me.
You're good.
It's probably something I'll spend the rest of my life doing. Because no matter where I go and what I do, I can't get away from it. Because if you go to a ball game, you can't throw a rock without hitting somebody like this. And you know something? You know the tragedy, my brother? You can't go to church and do the same thing and not hit a man that's broken and hurting like this as well. When you've got someone who's raising children that doesn't know how to raise adults, there are problems. And so that's why this is on my heart. It's such an important thing. And I didn't mean to say all that.
No, I appreciate it, David.
That's
what would you say to for me, David, I could look at the gap of the parent I dream of being and raising my kids in a way that I'd be very proud of, and then I could look at reality and get discouraged and frustrated with myself. So what would you say to the person out there that says, wow, I've never even thought about these 5 things, never heard them before, I feel like I'm so far behind? What would be your advice to somebody that just feels so behind the 8 ball when it comes to being intentional about these things?
Feeling behind is really, really important. It is. Recognizing, oh my goodness, I don't think I know what I'm doing. I might need to connect with somebody who knows a bit more about this than I do and see what I can learn. Once again, success leaves clues. Who's doing a better job at being a dad than I am, or at least it looks like that? Can I buy that guy a cup of coffee and can I say, look, what are you doing here? Can you help me? Can you point me in the right direction? Is there a book I can read or some videos I can watch? Is there a podcast I can listen to? I need help. I need help. We can't be guys who pretend we got all of our stuff together. Our culture has trained us to do that. Our culture almost insists that we do that. The truth is, none of us have our stuff together.
Yeah.
I don't have my stuff together. I'm a flawed dude. Now, I'm in a better position than I was 20 years ago, okay, by the grace of God and some hard work and some other men engaged in my life. You can't grow into manhood by yourself. You just can't. And by the way, being 25 years old, it makes you an adult, but it doesn't make you a grown man. I didn't really begin to grow into manhood until I was in my mid 30s, and didn't really kick off until 40s, because I'm just floundering around by myself, Chris, with occasional bump into a guy here. I got to where I was connected with some older guys who were able to have input in my life, and that's when my life really began. My understanding of fatherhood and parenthood and being a husband really began to develop. You got to have somebody else who's contributing to your life, because you don't know enough to contribute to your own. And everybody's in that position at some point.
I heard that.
So that's the thing.
I heard that which is most common is most universal, meaning
It is.
that the thing that I think is just me, come to find out, is more common than not, especially when it comes to other guys. Meaning we all have similar challenges and struggles, and so I could appreciate you sharing that. I resonate with that.
None of us had perfect dads, and none of us were perfect kids. So we could all embrace a little humility and seek some help.
That's really good. And we have so many resources at our fingertips.
Oh,
where I think about my dad's generation, I mean, he would have to go to the library and search for a book, and where now with our phone, there's podcasts.
If there was a book.
Right. Yeah, good call on that.
Yeah. I mean, if there was a book.
Yeah. There's so many resources now, is my point, with podcast, with
Yes,
just what's at our fingertip, really, with our phones.
absolutely. It's
You
amazing.
mentioned man versus a boy, and it sounds like there was
Hmm.
a moment in time where you begin to shift and head a different direction. So I wrote and did an outline around it so we could circle back to it in the future because I would like a future conversation between you and I, David, about the difference of a man versus a boy. So I noted that.
Well, let me put a sharper note, a sharper point on it. I, there is definitely a difference between a man and a boy, but there's also a bit more nuanced and subtle difference between an adult male, and a man.
Hmm.
The fact that you turn 21 doesn't mean you're a man. It means you're an adult or 18 or whatever that number happens to be. You know what? You're an adult when you can buy cigarettes and you can go into a bar and buy a beer. Yeah, you're a well, you're a man now, son. No, you're not. You're just an adult. That's a legal description, has nothing to do with the life that you have and the life that you have to offer.
Hmm.
Becoming a man is about growing into the person that God designed you and has prepared you to be. That's manhood. Growing into that place. I think it's interesting, and I don't think there's any theological issue with this, that Jesus was in his early 30s probably before he took any kind of step into public life. You know why? Because when he was 16, he was a 16-year-old kid. We know what he did when he was 12. He got away from his parents or simply walked off or whatever when they were in Jerusalem for the festival. And he goes to the temple and ends up 3 days later, they're realizing he's not with the caravan because that's the way they would travel. And they have to hurry back and get to Jerusalem. They're scurrying around and finally they find him. Probably it took them a week to do all of that. 3 days they searched for him in Jerusalem. And he's at the temple having theological conversations with the rabbis. Well, that's the kind of thing a 12-year-old kid would do. They were upset. They were livid. What are you doing? I guarantee you this. You take any Christian parent that you know, and their 12-year-old boy takes off and is gone for a week, and they finally catch up with him at the church someplace having a conversation with the pastor. Are they going to be happy about
No.
that? No. Why? Well, 12-year-old boys do stupid things sometimes. I jumped off the roof of my house. Fortunately, I didn't break
Right.
my leg, but you know, we there's a difference between being a boy and being an adult. There's a similar difference between being an adult and being a man.
Sounds like one's based on an age, a
You don't.
numeric number, and the other is based more maybe on
Yes.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
maturity
Yeah.
level.
Maturity. Absolutely. You absolutely maturity. I've said this for years. Again, from the backside of experience, no man should ever be allowed to pastor a church until they're in their early 40s. 40 to in their early 40s, because you know what, when you're 25 and full of vim and vigor and you've got more energy than the
Oh,
uh,
Energizer
ener-
Bunny.
yeah, 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 you got all that
Right.
energy, you got all that passion, you got all that vision, you got all that stuff. What you don't have is wisdom, and you don't know what you don't
That's
know.
true.
I, you know, and that's nothing. Look, I was pastoring. I was involved in ministry from my early 20s, youth ministry, college campus stuff, doing a variety of things, and I became a senior pastor when I was 30 years old. Way too early. Eh. So growing up is not an easy thing to
Yeah.
do, man, because there are too many opportunities to short circuit the process and to choose not to grow up.
David, where do people go to find you? Waco,
Waco,
Texas.
Texas.
Okay.
Come on down. Come on down. I'll buy you some
There we
tacos and
go.
some sweet tea. Actually, if um, you can reach me. My email address is Higg, HIGGTX, as in Texas, at gmail.com. Or you can Google David Higginbotham podcast, and there's a couple of podcasts on there. One that I do with my daughter, we call the 10 Things podcast, which is interesting. The first 2 seasons were about 10 things every man needs to know about women, and then 10 things every woman needs to know about men. Got a lot of responses about that. I do a podcast called the Learning to Thrive podcast, which we're in between seasons now, but we're hoping to be in a position to launch season 3 in September.
I'll share a link in the comments just to make it easy for people to click on to track you down.
Well, I appreciate that, Chris. By the way, if you're interested, if some of the stuff that I've mentioned this morning sort of caught your attention, I've got a PDF on the developing a foundation for your child's life. I'd be happy to send you the PDF and just sort of look at the outline and see if it makes any sense to you. By the way, if it doesn't make any sense to you, I'm certainly not offended, because, I'm in my 70th year, and so I don't have time to be offended by stuff.
Would you prefer if they email you to request that PDF? Okay, good to know.
Email me, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If you send me an email, I will send you. Actually, I've got several of those PDFs that came off the podcast that we've done previously, but I'd be happy to send you that. Look at it, see if it makes any sense, and don't hesitate to communicate with me by email, because I do respond.
Very good. Is there any final words that you have for us today before we wrap up today, David? Mm-hmm.
Yes, one final thing. You get to determine the kind of parent you're going to be tomorrow. You can't change the kind of parent you were yesterday. I can't change the kind of husband I was yesterday. But you get to be the kind of spouse and the kind of parent that you choose to be tomorrow. And when you string enough of those good choices together, you will have changed your life and the life of your children. So, at the risk of not being as good as you want to be, try to do that. It can change your life.
Thank you, David.
That's it. Godspeed to you, Chris. I appreciate you doing this with me.